Kofi, thank you for being interviewed today. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kofi. I'm a personal finance coach, similar to yourself, a blogger, similar to yourself. I love to write and read about all things, but I'm really big into personal finance. I guess my claim with personal finance really came at watching Playing with Fire. And I think similar, we were talking earlier before, where I chose to do nothing. And when I watched Playing with Fire, that really motivated me to create my business and tell my story and help people.
And then would you mind talking about just kind of like as part of your intro, like your like student loan payoff? Like your
Yeah. Yeah. So part of, I guess, a big piece that really got me here was paying off my student loan debt. So I think it was like the summer of 2016, and my then girlfriend, now fiance, was talking to me about, I think I was on Instagram and she was, in a budget Excel sheet, figuring out her student loans. And I was like, I'm past that. I don't do that stuff. But that was really like I think that was a big piece that motivated me to start taking a look at my student loans. And I was ashamed. We talk about shame around money. I was ashamed to look at my loans because I didn't know how much I owed. And I went in and I took a look at it, and the number was huge. And it was around $33,000. I think it's probably on the lower end for a lot of people. But after I took a look at how much I owed, I just got serious with it. I worked as a frontline producer at the time, and so I started throwing every bonus, tax return, um, man, Christmas money, just, change that I'd find on the ground. I mean, whatever. If you gave me money, I put it towards my loans. And within 1 year, I paid off about $33,000 worth of student loans.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's so good. It goes back to like, you don't know how long it's going to take. It feels like an impossible goal, but you got after it and you made the big sacrifices and got it done. It's amazing. It's so impressive.
But I have to tell this. I have to tell this story because, we were adding our kind of asterisks. I didn't plan on paying off my student loans in a year. That was like never the thing. It just got to the point where I was literally sitting at work. Mohila was the person that serviced my loans, and I was like, I owe $10,000. This is going to take me another 2 quarters of bonuses. And I'm not a big spender, but I do like to go buy a new pair of tennis shoes or some jeans. Like I'm a very frugal spender. Like I'm not a person that walks out of the mall with a lot of bags, but I just thought about the consequence of my next couple bonuses going towards my student loans. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to pay it off. And I was sweating. Like, I mean, it was not easy. I was like sweating because I was like, how if something happens and I need this money? But the goal was never to pay it off. I don't know that I've ever told that story, but yeah, my goal was never to pay off my loans.
Isn't it so weird? Isn't it so weird how that happens? Like, my husband and I did not set out to buy our house. Like, you focus on, being frugal, you focus on trying to improve, and then you're just like, oh, well, here we are.
Yeah, yeah. I had one of those stories. That was never the goal. I think I got lucky.
Well, it sounds like you did a lot that wasn't necessarily luck. So,
Yeah, yeah, you have that part. You have that part. But
so let's see. I was hoping that we could talk a little about like cash management. Kind of what do you do for your cash management system? And and I do mean cash from like the accounting perspective. So that's like checking and savings accounts, and as
mhm.
well as like paper cash. Do you use cash envelopes?
I don't. So right now with COVID, I'm staying clear of cash entirely. But pre-COVID, I used cash envelopes. But for as far as my cash management system, so I have three accounts. So I have my primary checking account and I have a bill pay account. The way that the bill pay helps me with my cash flow. Once upon a time, I used to pay all of my bills out of one account, whether you could believe it or not. And the problem that presented was in having all of my bills coming out of like my primary account that I was paying bills with was like, let's say I got paid and my rent came out and then my utilities came out, and then I bought a bunch of stuff. Like, it was very difficult for me to manage it on top of what I was naturally spending because I wasn't a big credit card person. So what I've learned is having a separate bill pay account has been like, a really, really beneficial thing to help me track my money. And then I say like a big thing for my cash flow is really budgeting. I know it sounds kind of corny and touche, but like, um, or repetitive, but I think the big piece with the budget is it helps me see everything. And by being able to see like all the places that my money is going, um, I'm just always at peace because a month and a quarter out, I plan my budget for the rest of the year and I can just adjust the month before. So like I'm able to see everything going out, and then charges and things that I have don't ever come as a surprise.
Okay, that's awesome. So when you say a month out, you have it planned, or a month or a quarter, so
Hmm.
are you planning the next quarter, or do you kind of have like the full year total and you just break that down into quarters and months?
Exactly. I have the whole year planned out and I break it down into quarters and months. So I think in January, I have like a good idea of all my expenses reoccurring that I have. And then I have an idea of my salary. And then each quarter, I have it all broken down. And then like the month ahead, if when COVID started, I started having a big grocery bill. And so I had to increase. Yeah, I don't know why. I eat the same amount. There's not like I've changed the amount that I eat. But yeah, that's how I do it. How about you? What do you do for your cash flow and cash management?
So similar on the budgeting, I think annual budgeting is underrated, but it sounds like that's what you do too. And I really like looking at your annual numbers because then you don't miss things like Christmas and like semi-annual
Mhm.
insurance payments. You're able to see all the spending, and I think it makes your monthlies more accurate. If you take that and break it down. And it also automatically gives you the numbers that you need for your sinking funds, right? If I need to be saving this much every month is technically Christmas money, then you can set that aside. Um, so we do an annual one. We don't really do quarterly anything, um, but we will sit down at the start of each month, sometimes into the month a little bit if we're running behind. um, and then just look at the current month and see if there's anything that we need to tweak. And we always we're pretty flexible with our budget, really. Um, as long as we're hitting our savings goal, then we kind of give ourselves the flexibility to spend the money that we have budgeted on whatever. So, maybe we initially budgeted money under entertainment, but then maybe we decide we want to eat out more, or COVID ends up running amok on our food budget as well. And then so then we just decide, okay, that's fine. However, as long as we're keeping to like the overall savings goal.
So my question to you is, and I know for us to get to the 4 years budget took several hours. It was not like an easy thing. My goodness, it was like pulling teeth, specifically for me, right? And I'm like the money coach, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want to do this. What would you say for somebody that's beginning who does not have their 4 year planned out, who is maybe not a budgeter? What would you say, or what kind of ideas would you give them to help them get in front of their finances and creating a budget?
So I would say start with tracking your spending, categorizing each expense as it comes in. We use mint.com and I really love that.
Yeah.
So every week we log in. If we wait more than a week, I find we forget what we were buying, which seems weird that you can forget what you were purchasing. But so we log in and just make sure, because sometimes the bank will categorize them in weird categories that
Mhm.
are wrong. Um, so logging in, categorizing each purchase, and really having a system for your finances is really the most important thing. We can talk tools like whether you use Mint or YNAB, these other softwares. But ultimately, if you have a system for it, you want to get to the place where it's pretty easy to get that information, to get your annual total. and it takes a while if you're just starting now of categorizing and tracking before you have it. Um, but yeah, even with the tracking, it still can be a little bit of a hassle to roll up all the numbers to annual and kind of doing those analysis on like, oh, well, this isn't including taxes. So then figuring out how to include taxes, or, if you're doing your annual, I don't know, kind of what it was that slowed you down, but we'll find things and we're like, wait a second, why was it so high in that category? And then, you have to take the time to drill into it and figure out, oh yeah, it was because of this. But that work really helps give you accurate numbers for your budgeting.
Yeah, I think for me, what took so long was really thinking about all of my expenses that I had for the year, because I got engaged. So now I have a wedding to plan. Now I have a house to buy. So, all these things were just like, we have, consolidating to help pay off loans. We have investments. We have retirement. And honestly, when you go down and you see what your monthly expenses are and you work on it and you talk about it, like you come to see you have a lot of expenses, like, small things like life insurance, auto insurance, cell phone bill. So many things come on. You're like, oh my goodness, this is why your grocery bill, and then separating your grocery bills from your household items, from so there's just so many different columns, and that's why it probably took a while. And then seeing how much money comes out from each one of those things, you try to be as lean as possible. But for the sake of having a healthy life, you can't be maybe as lean and as frugal as you'd like to be.
Yeah. You brought up a great point. If someone is, just getting started doing annual budgeting, it's okay to just go through and estimate, or, try to pull up all the ones that you can think of if you don't have that historical background of actuals. Um, I also do, whenever we do our annual budgeting, I always pull up the prior year's budget or the prior year actual spending and kind of use that as a starting point, and then pull in those things that you talked about, like, oh, okay, well, this year we're planning for a wedding and for a house, and then figuring out how much that is going to cost and adding those in. So I like starting with the historical actuals as a starting point, but then, yeah, it just takes a little bit of time to go through and think through each of those things. But yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, that's where for people, that's where a financial coach might come into play to help you a little bit, is to have somebody to sit you down and hold you accountable. And if you're not in a place, to work with a financial coach, I think something else like maybe just having a friend who holds you accountable might be another really good tip. But there's a lot of good blogs and a lot of good podcasts out there that can really help break it down and how to do it. But I will say that there is a time commitment to it. And I think it's difficult and an injustice to have this conversation without acknowledging that it does take time to your point, pull that history and things alike.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, it takes a while to get familiar with your finances to be able to fill it in. And I consider myself to be like a DIY finance person. Just like there's tons of great resources on the internet to learn how to do a lot of those things. So yeah, I agree. It's good to seek coaching if you are struggling with it a lot and spending a lot of time on it. But it depends.
Yeah, it takes the right blend. And I had to come to terms with different people learn and work in different ways. So for me, seeing things on pen and paper is really good. But I also like to do like an audit and help people when I sit down to take a look at prior months. And I've read the Choose FI. I don't know if you've seen their book, but they talk about like the value of spending and spending your money along with like your values. And so I think to me, I did a speaking engagement with college students, and I was like, okay, what are the top three things here? They're like Chick-fil-A, Chipotle, and McDonald's. And so, if you go and you look at a college student's budget, it's going to have a lot of different things versus when you get into that hump of being into your career, some of the different things that you spend money on. So I think a big piece that we have to normalize is just meeting people where they are and making it okay to spend wherever you want to go. But ultimately, the goal is to build to where you want to be.
Yeah. You mentioned, you know, how there's so many transactions and how it really is difficult to compile all of those and, see where all of your money is going. And I think that's a great point in favor of creating a system for your finances. And, there's tons of different ways to do it. I mean, you can have a paper tracking system where you write down each of the
Yeah.
expenses and add them up. There's software that you can use. There's spreadsheets. I'm a big spreadsheet person, so I love a good spreadsheet. But yeah,
Yeah, a lot of people use Excel. I'm an Excel user. I do a lot of my stuff in Excel. But as we talk about budgets, one thing that we talked about going into this was like managing generosity and giving while paying off debt. And I think that this is a very interesting time. With COVID, I have older parents, and I have some family overseas who their work has been stopped due to COVID. They can't work, and as I look to create my plan to retire early, well, my fire plan, I should say, to retire early, giving is a big piece of it. And recently I had to acknowledge that if I'm going to give, like I have a dollar amount that I give to my mother every single month. And what I had to come to terms with was if I give money to my mom every single month, that slows down my trajectory of investments, of what I could be doing going towards saving. But you also don't want to be, you know, you don't want to be cheap, and you don't want to cut off your family. So what are your ideas around some of that? Like, how do you give while paying off debt?
yeah, certainly it's a difficult thing to figure out for yourself. How comfortable you are and how much you're willing to give, because, like you said, it directly slows down progress you're making on any kind of money goal, paying off debt, saving emergency funds, fi. Um,
Hmm.
it it's hard for me. That's something that I've struggled with in the past, not being very generous, especially when I was paying off debts, just because I was so narrow focused on that. um,
Hmm.
and I always kept in the back of my mind, I'll be able to give more once I kind of have my finances stable,
Yeah.
once I have an emergency fund, and once my debt is at a manageable level. I certainly paid off like high interest rate debt first, and then when I got down to like my 2% student loans, then I started doing more giving and, vacations again, that kind of thing. um, so yeah, deciding how aggressively are you trying to achieve your goal is one part of the consideration. Certainly it's good to give, and now that my husband and I are completely debt free, which is exciting, and bought our house in cash, so we don't have rent or
Awesome.
mortgage or anything.
That's
We're able to give really so much money, and so it feels good to be able to do that.
mhm.
So I go back and forth. If giving is really important to you, that should be a part of your journey. I will say, one of the things I did was try to donate time whenever I could. So volunteering to help out with things, doing charitable, like serving at the soup kitchen, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think the where I kind of fell in the middle was coming to peace with the fact that I might not achieve FI quickly, because if I'm being honest, I kind of look at my life that I have, right? And I don't believe that I achieved it by any great, you know, self thing that I did. I believe that a lot of my success is that of things that people have done for me, and some lucky breaks that I've had, some given, some people that gave to me, whether it was, to your point, their time, their talent, their treasures. So for me, I think I look at it from a spiritual point of I have so much now and I've been given my whole life that stopping may not get me to as quick as I'd like to be, or may not get me to fire as quick as I'd like to be. But by giving, the way I look at it is I've been giving my whole life and I've never gone without. If I continue to give, I won't go without. And that's just how I have, worked that compartment into my mind of giving is, hey, look, you've made it this many years without, starving, without not having food. You will make it many more continuing to give. And I'll just tell you that somehow I've always managed to stay above, to continue to build my net worth and things that are like, and these are things that I never thought about, right? Like we're having this conversation, but growing up from a low income community, like these are things that were never in my purview of investing in the stock market and things that are like. So um, I don't know. I just kind of take a chance. I take a chance with faith and believing that that'll come to pay off. And until it proves me wrong, I will say that the alternative is to have another stream of income that can match the amount of giving. Is generally the advice that I have.
I like that. I've never heard that idea before. Have a stream of income specifically for like, I mean, I guess you could do both with charitable giving and with like family giving.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It's so interesting to me to hear about how people separate their finances and think about the different kinds of incomes that they have or how they break it up. Um, but to your point, I mean, I absolutely agree. I grew up below the federal poverty line, and we received so much from like church pantries, and I feel really grateful now that I'm able to give back. And I don't want to be too political, but I even feel that way about taxes. I'm always like, I feel good paying them because I know that I receive so much from state and federal
Mhm.
sources. So it feels good to be able to give back.
And I think I don't know if that's political, but I think that's a good conversation to have, and seeing some of the different things. And I think whenever we have these conversations, like just talking to you, like I never knew that you grew up below the federal poverty line. Like I never knew that was something that you experienced. I met you, we were talking at FinCon, and you were telling me how you bought your house in cash, and I'm like, what? Did anybody else hear that? But I mean, how do you think you get there? How do you get from Roxanne growing up, in this space to being a person who, gets past that and really takes pride in giving back to for the government to have resources to give to people like yourself when you were younger and your family? Like, that's a huge gap. How do you get there?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. Finance has been my main focus my whole life.
Mhm.
I even now, like we're dinks, dual income, no kids. So it's always been a little easier for me to prioritize it. There's certainly components of luck in it as well, and I would say that I've always focused really hard on kind of optimizing the things that I buy to make sure that they're things that are really going to bring value and not just impulses. Um, and then forcing myself into high savings rate. Um, Basically, just going as hard as I could because when I graduated and went to college, I went broke at one point. I had $200 in my account and was unemployed. And I just remember thinking like, I need to raise my standards for like how much money I'm going to have and really make it a priority and hope that that is a short term thing and that then I can get back to regular life.
Mm. That's I think that it's I think people kind of look at like these social media pages and people look at people talking about fire and they don't really know kind of those obstacles that people had to get there. But I think that yeah, I just my goal is to always help people to understand that there is the ability to do things like that. Right now, we're saving for 20% down for a home, which is to me a huge number to put towards a house. But for me, I think also showing people that you can be debt free. Young African American male, and I think there's different communities where people don't see a lot of different things. And if there's, a community of users online, I certainly hope they connect to you, Roxanne, to see your story. Because black, white, I think the fact that you can say, hey, look, I'm a person who grew up in this space and this is where I'm at now, without like seeing people who look like us come from backgrounds like that, is very difficult to try and elevate your thinking to think like, hey, I can get to this space. So I certainly appreciate you sharing that story, and just wish you continued success with finances, and just shit like a lot of the content that you share. And I just thought you were very pleasant when we met in DC. And who knows that it would have turned into this great relationship where we get to catch up.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. It's certainly, I don't know, I've battled a lot, like feeling insecure when I was like going to college, like I didn't belong. I didn't apply for very many scholarships because I didn't want everyone to know that we struggled with money. Um,
Mm,
Actually, neither of my parents graduated high school. So kind of like you said, like you don't really have anyone to ask. You don't really,
mm,
have a source of like information or help. Um, but I should say I was very lucky because I do have grandparents on both sides that always bailed us out when we were struggling when I was younger. Um, and I should also say our house, I'm pretty lucky in Montana that it was like $211,000 for a 3-bedroom house, which I know is like that doesn't happen in big cities, right? Uh, so, if you're saving, that's something as well. But
I'll still say 200. I mean, I live in Atlanta. That'll get you some good property.
will it? Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the fact that you guys were able to do that is pretty awesome. And I love your transparency of saying, hey, I had some grandparents that helped bail us out. It's interesting, like when we talk about our money stories, and the fact that like you think about like applying for scholarships is something that would have exposed that you didn't. Granted, I don't. For me, I think I kind of lived up on that. Like every single scholarship, started with I was raised in a single parent household. Like I wanted people to know. I'm like, hey, look at me. I need the money. All those other people, they don't need the money. I need the money. So
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how we use our narratives and our backgrounds, but also the role that they play. Like for me, I wouldn't say that it was a source of empowerment, but it was a narrative that I used because it was my truth. It was my truth if I didn't come from a lot of money. Same, my mom didn't graduate from high school. And, as I was applying for scholarships, which I didn't get many of them, I think I really gave up because I think part of it was, self identity of maybe not being as smart as all the other people who are, going to apply. And I think dealing with rejection, which, is still a basis of our foundation. I think it's just kind of interesting how those two things maybe change. Do you think looking back now, you might have done things different knowing what you know now?
Yeah. 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 Big yes. Yeah, I felt so much shame about money. Really, college was the time when I finally started getting away from that shame of it, just because, it kind of became more socially acceptable to be broke, to not have money.
Yeah.
Um,
Or college student.
yes, poor college student, exactly. So then, I kind of had an excuse and I leaned into that for sure once I finally started conquering the shame of like, oh, struggling with money, which it doesn't even make sense. Like if other people are struggling with money, I'm always like, oh, it's circumstantial. They had a hard time. This bad thing happened. I'm not hard on them. But something about myself, like I've feared other people's judgment of our family. So definitely I would apply for more scholarships. And I'm not that, I've really worked on like feeling less shame around money. And so I definitely would change things.
Yeah, I think we probably need to start a campaign around shame around money, because that's something that I think a lot of people deal with, especially like within demographic that I work with, is I think it's a shame of a different kind. Like people say, I feel like because I'm a accountant or because I'm in finance, or because I'm an attorney, I should know more about money and investing. And whenever my friends start talking about it, a lot of people carry shame for things that they don't know. And I think that that's like a super important thing that should be an ongoing conversation of it's okay to not know everything about money because I don't think of myself as knowing everything about it. But I think we have to create a space for people to say, hey, I don't know. Can you tell me more about that investing? Or can you tell me more about loans? Can you tell me more about, things like that? But I think shame around money I think it's a big deal. I think it's a big thing that our community can do better at around kind of breaking some of those thoughts and ideas.
Yes, 100. I agree. I always tell clients when they're dealing with some of the similar shames, like, it's not taught widely in the US. Financial education isn't. We learned how to balance a checkbook. We didn't learn how to budget or anything else in school, and that was only because I took home ec.
Mhm.
So it's mostly not taught. And I always say, like, I have a degree in accounting. I worked in finance for 9 years, and I still learn things all the time where I'm like, why did nobody tell me this sooner?
Well, to your point, I've worked on the finance side and working on finance of like working in like corporate finance is so different because I mean those numbers are so big and so ridiculous and so much money coming in and out. But working on like personal finance, those numbers are a lot different. But to your point, I think the state of New Jersey and Rhode Island mandated financial literacy in schools, but they don't have the right people teaching it, and they don't have a curriculum that really applies to everybody. So I remember learning how to balance a checkbook, and I remember taking accounting in high school, but there was never anything. Especially, I feel like a big disservice that I got from college was entering the real world and not knowing how to because in college I did work and I paid rent and things of the like, but I didn't have, a serious income. I didn't have a consistent income. And to your point, it's not taught in school, so people shouldn't be shamed around it. And just as we're talking, I'm literally writing down a shame campaign just to debunk some of the common ideas that you're quote unquote supposed to know, but nobody really knows. And people don't really care that you know them or not. Like that's what I'm also learning is people don't care. They just want to help. That's why you have so many great people like yourself out there creating content.
Well, I mean, so I was actually just watching Wonder Woman, and there's a quote in there
It's a
about,
good movie.
I love that movie.
It's a
It's so
great
good,
movie.
isn't it?
It
It's,
is. It is. That's an awesome movie.
it's top three superhero films.
I agree.
I'm
I
just gonna
agree.
say it.
Yeah, no.
But he talks at the beginning about his dad and how he said, when there's a problem in the world, you can do nothing or you can try to do something. And I already tried doing nothing. And that's why I started coaching. I met a coworker that couldn't afford a $600 flight to go to the East Coast to see her mom who was terminally ill. And oh my gosh, I get choked up every time I talk about it. But um, she talked about how like her siblings were disappointed that she didn't have the money and just having hard conversations with them. And it's really heartbreaking. People really struggle with it. And yeah, so basically coaching and doing Finance Rocks, my YouTube channel, is, just to that aim, trying to help people eliminate that stress.
So now that you say this, and I've been in a similar situation. In 2013, I was adopted, and my adopted mom passed, and I was unemployed. I lost my job a week before she passed away, and I didn't have money to go back home. And I don't think about it, but I was very much so ashamed that a colleague, I was a nonprofit that I volunteered with, offered to pay for me because she knew that I was unemployed. And I was so ashamed, like that I said no to it. And I probably should have said yes because I definitely needed it. I ended up driving to Ohio and got a speeding ticket, which is another story within itself. But I think there's this inherent shame, especially for me in being a man, like of I am supposed to have. And maybe I don't know if it's being a man or maybe just my ego at the time, but there was this idea that I was supposed to have life figured out at I don't know, 24, 25. Um, and the fact that I didn't have money for it, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't like tell anybody. And if I would have told my dad, he would have definitely helped me and would have gotten me a ticket to come back. But there's just this internal shame. I think for me that came with not being employed, which took me a long time to get over. But I think that there's a space for a conversation around shame and really dismantling the ideology or really calling people out. Like we're in this whole area of Black Lives Matter and calling out racism and sexism and things of the like. I think it's just a bullying tactic or just a really nasty thing that people do. And I just kind of want to, expand on that conversation with you in the future if that's something that you're interested in, because I see that emotion that it elicits. And every time I talk about it, I just remember I felt like that was my financial rock bottom at the time and never wanting anybody else to feel that way.
What would you say that was like a turning point for you for where you started taking your finances more seriously?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that so from February 2013 to December of 2013 was probably some of the hardest months of my life just because being unemployed and you had that moment in college. I had a lot of those moments in college, but I kind of lived on the edge, right? But I think once I graduated, I felt like I'd elevated to a different status where I was supposed to have things,
Mhm.
and not having it was a major turning point for me. And like I'm really big into savings. You talk about a high savings rate, and I think that period of my life is what really ignited me to be a very, very serious saver. Like every time I talk to like advisors, they're like, you have too much cash, you need to invest more. And I'm like, if I'm unemployed, I never want to be in that place where I can't pay bills. So I always carry like a surplus of cash, probably to my detriment when you think about like long-term investing. But that was definitely a turning point for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry you went through that. That's the worst thing about struggling with money, right? Is it flares up when you're going through turbulent emotional times as well. So then you it's like a one-two punch of, you're dealing with the death of someone that you love and the stress of money and yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I think the shaming of money is something that this is my first time hearing it. And I think, the one thing that helped me through that time was learn about challenges that other people were having. I think it helped normalize the situation that I was in. And, I think when people hear that similar things happen, they start to feel community and they don't feel so alone.
Yeah. Well, I would say, I mean, I always struggle. Like I want to try to like help inspire and motivate people, but I just don't know like the right words to say. Like I yeah, I didn't know how long it was going to take to like get my finances right. Like I was like, I don't know if it's going to take 50 years to, pay off the debt and, to save a reasonable amount of money to be middle class. And so it's hard because you don't know how long it's going to take. I feel really fortunate. Like I overshot my goal of not being poor, not being broke. So I think that if people are motivated and focus on like their day-to-day spending instead of like getting overwhelmed by big goals, um,
Yeah.
I think that people can do it. And I'm an optimist, so I don't know.
Yeah. I think I agree with you 100% in that I think that um, personal finance is made too granular. And the more we can make it palatable, like the more we can take a look at what we do on a daily basis and just debunk ideas. Because some people, literally, I've had people say to me, there's no way I do X, Y, and Z job. There's no way that I'm ever going to get out of that. I have just given up. And I think for me, the day that I paid off all my debt, I just saw like a lot more runway that I had to be able to save more, to start investing, things that I just never thought about. Oh, I thought about saving, but starting to invest in that, I didn't have that debt over me. Literally at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, a colleague of mine texted me. he said, I have big news. And I thought, he was having a kid. And he's like, no, I'm debt free. So I just think the more we socialize, and the reason why he texts me is we work together. And the day that I paid off my debt, I was in an office with three other people. And I said, I just paid off my debt, you guys. So in opening up that piece of my life to him, I think that gave him the grace to share with me. And ever since, we've just cheered each other on. So I just ask that we continue to share our stories and share our truths. And I believe that people will latch on, will catch some of it and relate to it.
Sounds awesome. I love it. I mean, it's so true. It's so taboo to talk about. People don't even talk about it. People don't ask for help. You know, I love to hear that you guys got to share that story between each other. Um, I've had some experiences where I have like finally opened up about things, and sometimes people are kind of resistant to it still. But yeah, sometimes people, you find out that they are on a journey as well and are trying to improve, and then you get to share into it. So that's awesome.
Yep, that's what I'm here for. The elephant in the room. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, and let's create space for more people to win. Let's create more space for people to win, because I think one thing that we were going to talk about is, like, being unpleasant in a job. And I think, like, the ability to reach fire gives you the option to choose, and having that option to not stay in a place because you need a paycheck. When you're not healthy, being able to take a healthy sabbatical from work because you don't need a paycheck. Like, I think there's so many options that just, to your point, things that we're not taught. We're not taught, hey, take a sabbatical when you're working, save up enough so you can step away from work. And I think that fire gives us a lot more career choices and options that often just is not thought about because it's not part of our regular narrative.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people work jobs that are really draining emotionally. And I think that affects people's finances quite a bit, like kind of subconsciously. If you're drained at the end of the day and then you go grocery shopping, maybe you buy, a bunch of junk food that you wouldn't have otherwise purchased. And I think it's really insidious because you don't really see it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that absolutely the emotions of it affect our spending in ways that we don't always realize.
So really a quick story. I was in a break room once and this thing, oh my goodness, I just was burning up when this colleague said this. But oh guys, like, hey, do you know a good place to buy a car? I think my car's on its last leg. And a colleague came and they said, what, you work hard, go buy you something new. Go buy something new. And I remember saying, what? Like in my mind. And so I just stayed in there. I let the colleague leave. I'm like, don't buy a new. I was like, don't do it. Do not go buy a $50,000 car. But to your point, it does affect our emotion. That person felt like they work hard. They deal with a lot of stress. So they're going to go buy something that's luxurious that makes them feel good. And am I one to put anybody down for that? No. But am I one to say, just do it in a way that makes sense? Like, take yourself on a vacation that makes you feel good. But getting in debt to feel good is part of, like, and it has health effects. Like, what? I'm going to have a steak tonight, or, tonight I'm going to have a full pizza. And, we eat to cure our ills within life. We spend to cure our ills. We shop, we go on shopping sprees, not knowing the debt that we're creating on the back end. And a recent post that I shared was commit to not adding any new debt. So that's my mantra
Yeah, I
for.
love it. Because that's the start of it, right? A lot of people will try to start improving, but they still are putting things on cards, and so that is negating their progress. Yeah, it's crazy to me. So when I first heard of like YOLO, you only live once, like all I could think of was like, yeah, YOLO. So why live it stressed out about money all the time? Like it just makes perfect sense to me that, give up now so that way in the future, you can, have a better life and not have to stress. And, it's so temporary, right? If the coworker purchases the vehicle, yeah, it feels good now, but then all the debt behind it or lease payment behind it is going to cause stress down the road.
Well, yeah, YOLO is dangerous. Let me just say that YOLO is dangerous. Like, the idea is like I could die tomorrow. I remember I had a coworker in my first job, and she always used to say, I don't know, I could die tomorrow, and she would always ask me to borrow money, and I would just be like, well, if you started saving a little bit, you wouldn't ask me for money for food. Like for like, I don't have enough money for my food. Can you give me a ride home? And like, I don't care. Yeah, but the principle behind it used to burn me up. YOLO is dangerous, man, because it's on this premise of you can die at any moment, but the reality is like statistics show that you will live a longer life than short. So to your point, if you prepare for that longer life with short time sacrifices, but I think with this whole COVID campaign, I think it's come to show the threat of our society is we're very individualistic. Like, do what feels good versus doing what's good for the well-being of the community in the future. With people not wearing masks, but I don't want to get into all of that. But you do have to sacrifice. And for me, when I was paying off my debt, I made a sacrifice to not eating out. I made a sacrifice to cooking more. I made a sacrifice. I got a roommate. Um, I did everything I could to get my expenses as low as possible. And I think oftentimes we don't consider those things. And uh, even one of my biggest mistakes is I've been with my company for 5 years, and I wish I would have moved my personal cell phone to my work cell because literally it's just an extra $60-$70 bill that is covered for work. And I had a coworker who did it, and it's brilliant. I calculated like he'll have saved $6,000 in some like 6 or 7 years. So sometimes it's just some of those small things that we can tweak.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, I think part of it too is finding contentment with spending less. So that way it doesn't feel so much like deprivation. If you
Yeah.
can like convince yourself that, cutting this out or swapping this is better, then, you said roommate, that's an excellent way, to save money. Um, but yeah, like you said, it's a sacrifice and, you can find positive ways to frame it though, so that way, like obviously you kept your roommate, right? So you came up with ways to convince yourself that that was a good thing to do and that it was worthwhile, improved your quality of life. So I do I try to have and instead of or, you know, happiness and saving money, even though at times, yes, if you're sprinting, if you're in a bad place financially, then yes, or becomes a necessity, but trying to
Mhm.
find and whenever we can.
I like that. I like that. Trying to find and whenever we can.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Because certainly I'm sure that you had plenty of good, experiences that came from that. I'm sure that you found, happiness and contentment at it, or else you wouldn't have continued doing it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just allowed me to save for a lot of things. Like when I got engaged and I went to buy my ring, I learned the true cost of fine jewelry at that time. But had I not made some of those sacrifices, I was able to buy it in cash as a negotiation.
Good.
And I was like, okay, if I just give you the cash straight up right now, will you cut me a deal? And they were like, yeah. They were like, okay. So I just say that to say, like, at the time, we don't think about, I wasn't thinking about, getting engaged when I was paying off my debt, but like, there's a lot of, like, I guess, there's a domino effect that it has that sometimes you can't see in that moment. Like I started maxing out my Roth IRA. This year, my goal is to max out my 401k for the first time. Yeah. So yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal. But I think when you're going through it, you don't have that foresight to say, hey, in the future, I'll be able to do all these things until you get there and you say, man, I'm really happy that I was able to do that. So, um, yeah, yeah, that sacrifice is big.
Agreed. Let's see. Did we go over everything? Did you have
I think
anything
so.
else? Oh, oh gosh. to circle back around, I did just have one other question for you. Um, with the sinking funds that you do
Hmm.
they do you reset them every year to zero or do you carry them forward?
Oh, that's a good question. I carry them forward. So, for instance, we went to Ohio for Father's Day, and let's say I had like $400 in my sinking fund, and let's say I use $300. So my goal is to replenish to get back over four or five, $1,000. I also have a lot of credit card points. So things like travel, I try not to use a lot because I have, my points and things like that. But I carry them forward. I carry it forward. I don't reset just because, there's just things that will continuously happen. So the reason why I just carry it is like if I have another trip and if I just deplete it, then I'll have to find money for a trip versus just continuing to add to it. Is do you do something similar?
So I guess I carry forward our savings. Well, not really, I guess. Every year I start with fresh sinking funds, which kind of
Mm,
works out because we spend less January, February, and March than like the summer months and fall. So we kind of just are able to start saving up for those later in the year things. But yeah, I never thought of it before, and then it came up the other day, and someone asked me, and I was like, oh gosh, I guess I don't carry them forward. I never even considered it, so thank you.
yeah, and I don't know that it's the best way, but it's what helps me. It's what helps me because I think like a year 2 years ago my mom had a slip and fall and I had to travel to go see her and it was a really expensive trip
Yeah.
because like literally I was at work like let's say a Tuesday morning and I was looking at flights that were $900. So our experiences shape our lives and they shape the decisions that we make. And so with that experience, I'm always kind of heavy handed on my sinking funds in case I need to have an emergency trip or emergency travel, something comes up where I need to get out of state. Um, but also in the same breath, like I'm very lucky to have like a lot of points. So if I might not have enough in my sinking funds, I can like use points to help supplement for something.
That's interesting. Yeah, I did see a post on social media the other day talking about like using cash back cards as part of your emergency fund strategy, which is something I had never thought about before either.
Yeah. I just I know some people who are very deep into like the points thing, and I'm not one of those people. Like
Yeah.
I met a guy who like talked to me and oh he I met him, I was doing a photo shoot and he was like, oh, are you into personal finance? And I was like, yeah. And he mentioned FinCon and we were both at FinCon together. Little did we know we're in a coffee shop in Atlanta, by the way. Um,
Cool.
and we have a call and he's telling me about you get the card with the $500 fee and then you triple all your points and then you go down to the free card and then you get the offer again. And I mean I like wrote all of it down and I literally have not looked at that paper again just because it's just not my thing. I'm not a big credit card spender. I don't have like enough expenses to get a new credit card that would also justify me paying for these annual fees. But some people get really into it.
Yeah. I'm not into it either. When I travel, it stresses me out like thinking about like the points not actually counting or the flight not actually, I don't know. I'm really weird about it from that. And, I don't really trust myself to like make sure that I'm optimizing the points correctly and reading all of the
Right.
rules. Because I've had some bad experiences like with couponing even where like you take it up and you're like, oh, I filled it out perfectly. And they're like, no, and I'm just like, oh man, okay. So I'm not,
So you that
yeah.
person in line,
Oh,
holding up the line.
yeah. I do like a cash back card though. We do have one cash back card because that's easy, straightforward.
I have to look into that.
Yeah. But as long as you pay it off in full every month.
That is the key.
Yeah.
That is the key. Um, do you really quick, just some that came to mind? Do you have any thoughts on like companies like Sophie and balance transfers?
So Sophie, that's like, do they consolidate? Is that what?
Yeah, so like you can roll over, let's say you have like a auto loan, you can like roll it over into like a Sophie account that has 0% and like, but you have to pay it off within. And a lot of people just ask me about it in passing. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So I've never done it, but in
Oh, God.
theory, yeah, I haven't done it, but in theory, if you can get a card that has like a balance transfer, 0% interest for a certain number of months, it makes sense to me that you would go ahead and, as long as you make sure that you're taking advantage of that and not just kicking the can, kicking the
Yeah,
can down the road, you know what I mean? As long as you're
yeah.
actually addressing it, then it seems like an okay way to save a little interest. I don't know of any downsides. Do you?
No, yes, I do. The downside is if you kick the can, what can happen is, let's say you're on your auto loan, you have an 8% interest rate, and you transfer it to something like Sophie. If you don't pay it off within that time, let's say you have, 24 months to pay it off, the rates are absorbent. Like, you might go from an 8% on your car loan to 0% for 2 years, but past the 2 years, the rate is 24%. So you
Yeah.
just have to make sure that you unequivocally can pay that amount without a doubt, without any question, that you can get it paid within the amount, or else those interest rates jump up really high. And I think like there might be a small fee. There might be like $100 fee to get it transferred over. But if I'm looking at 8% over 2 years, or if I'm looking at anything over 2%, I think it's a pretty good deal to do it. You just have to make sure you understand the terms and agreement of, if you don't pay it off within the allotted time, that those interest rates do get pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. What you said. I second that. That sounds smart to me.
And like I said, I've never used it, but so many people ask me about it, and I just, like to get other people's thoughts on things. But no, no, it's great joining you, and thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kofi. We will have to do more videos like this, and
Yes.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you.